the Electile Dysfunction Podcast with Ashton Cohen.
Welcome back to the Electile Dysfunction Podcast with Ashton Cohen. I'm Ashton Cohen. I'm joined today by one of the world's experts in public speaking, Richard Greene. Richard has coached everyone from presidents, international leaders, CEOs, Princess Diana. He is a political communications strategist, civics educator, attorney, and author of the books WTF Are the Midterms and Words That Shook the World, 100 Years of Unforgettable Speeches and Events. So we're going to talk about what makes someone a great speaker, a great leader, who are the best and most inspirational leaders of all time, what are the most important speeches that shaped history, who, if anyone, has those qualities today, those great leadership, speaking abilities, how does one improve their communication, and I'm also going to dive in with Richard on his thoughts regarding how each political party communicates the Republicans, the Democrats, what their message are, what they're doing wrong, what they're doing right. So, Richard, thanks so much for being with me. It's a real pleasure.
You're welcome. It's fun to be on with a fellow Southern California reformed lawyer.
Yeah, recovering attorney as well. Yeah. So actually start there. So you were an attorney as well. How did you get into being a public speaking coach?
Well, it was really serendipity. In 1983, I get an invitation to go to this seminar called Fear into Power, the Firewalk Experience. And it showed a picture of a young man dressed in a suit, walking barefoot over a bed of hot coals. And of course, it turned out to be Tony Robbins. And it turned out that it was the very first seminar that Tony Robbins had given in the United States in his life. And he was 23 years old. I was, a few years older, and I went, and there were only 150 people. I walked on fire, and I saw this superstar communicator named Tony Robbins. And I go up to him after the seminar, and I say, "My name is Richard Greene. I'm an attorney in town, and I have to tell you, you're one of the best communicators I've ever seen in my life. I am absolutely certain that you're going to go on and make a huge contribution to the world, and I'd love to help you do it." And he said, "Great, let's have lunch." We had lunch. At that point, there were only two other people working with him. And I ended up being hired as his lawyer and did a bunch of PR for him and help in developing his organization and outreach to other people to help validate him because he was such a young guy. And then he moved into my law office suite, and we would stay up till 2, 3 every morning discussing how he's going to take on the world and the essence of communication and what makes him such a great public speaker. And after 2 years of working with him, I said, this is so much more fun and gratifying than practicing law. So I quit my law practice, traveled around the world for a while, and came back and focused completely on teaching what I learned from Tony and from this science of communication called neuro-linguistic programming, NLP. And I've now done workshops and coaching in 53 countries, and I'm really glad that I made that shift. But I didn't want to just replicate what Tony was doing because no one could be like Tony Robbins. So I picked a niche, and that is the number one fear in the world amongst adults, which is public speaking. And it's like with the tools that I learned from Tony and just modeling him and what I already knew, I already loved public speaking. I created a very disruptive model that helps people overcome their fear of public speaking, super simple, super quick, and have it be fun for them because it should be fun. But public speaking has not been taught enough in schools or even in corporations, political organizations. And when it's taught, it's often taught incorrectly, like 180 degrees incorrectly. So it was really fun to create a whole disruptive approach to that with my TED Talk and traveling around the world, and it's been very gratifying.
He is a brilliant speaker. He's one of the when I think about like who are the best speakers today, the most, the kinds of guys who could just like make you like run through a wall or something like that, right?
Or walk on fire.
Walk on fire, literally. Like it's him. He comes like top 5, maybe even number 1. Like I can't think of other people today who are that charismatic. Well, what made you go to his to the original event to begin with?
Because I'm very adventurous, and it's like, oh, wow, this looks like an interesting thing. maybe I could do it. Maybe I can walk on fire, and I got to check it out. And I was free that Friday night, and I went.
That's so funny. So with him, he just has this like insane amount of energy. How
Mhm.
does he? And that's kind of like he plays into his charisma as a public speaker. It's just like it's his energy is like intoxicating. There are obviously different great speakers who utilize sort of different patterns. Reagan was more folksy, and he was a great speaker, but they're sort of like folksy, like you just loved him kind of thing, right? For the people who liked him. And JFK and Martin Luther King were more sort of that inspirational, like high above the mountain.
I've been to the
And-
mountaintop, and I've
yeah,
looked over, and I've seen the promised
yeah.
land. I may not get there with you, but we as a people will get to the promised land.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
there's no one better than Dr. King.
I think he's the best of all time as well. Yeah, I do. You have different speaking styles, different people who are considered great or inspirational leaders, utilizing different ways of galvanizing people or inspiring them or inspiring action or getting people to follow them. What do you see as between, as we said, you have the inspirational types, you have the folksy types, you have the more maybe FDR types who kind of just speak to you, but may not like raise their voice and be that as charismatic, Tony Robbins types. What do you see as sort of the commonalities between the great speakers, the great leaders of all different kinds? Are there certain things in common they have?
Well, funny enough, that was the focus of my TED Talk, the 7 communication secrets of the greatest speakers in history. I would say if you had to boil it down to one thing, Ashton, it is to be yourself. No BS, no acting, no performing, no giving a speech, just letting that authentic passion come out. And I've broken it down actually to 7 different secrets, as I mentioned. But the core thing is that sense of authentic passion, finding, having a conversation from your heart about something that you feel deeply passionate about, but what's the purpose of the speech? The purpose of the speech is not to aggrandize yourself, not to get elected, not to get more votes, not to have people love you. The purpose of great speaking and what makes great speakers, whether it's JFK or Bill Clinton or Martin Luther King, and I think Barack Obama was actually quite a good speaker, Ronald Reagan, all of that is to actually help other people, right? To share an idea that can be beneficial to individuals or a nation or the world, to share a product, to share a new perspective, to share a service, whatever it is. But it has the common denominator is being yourself, and from that place of being yourself and that authentic passion about what you're talking about, to actually make a difference in other people's lives, in the world. For example, we do that. We are great public speakers. Every time we go to a movie, for example, and we walk out of that movie theater in our hometown and we run into some people that we know, and we say, oh my God, you have to see this movie. It's incredible. The acting, the cinematography, it made me cry, whatever it is. Why are you advertising for Disney or Fox or whoever the film company is? Why are you doing that? You're doing that because it's an innate, natural, really strong desire inside of all human beings to help other people. You paid $15 for that movie ticket. You got $200 worth of benefit on it. That return on investment just really inspired you. And you're essentially saying, here's $185, the difference between the value and what you paid. And we love doing that. We love talking about things, whether it's a movie or a play or a concert or a new food or a new restaurant. That's the essential nature of being a great public speaker, is wanting to help other people.
Yeah, and there's something about, we talk about authenticity. When somebody is phony, when they're not saying what they believe, even if they're otherwise a talented speaker, it just doesn't hit the right way, right? There's just something, I think, like innate that it just doesn't seem to hit the right way.
You're talking about Hillary Clinton.
Yeah.
If
And then talk
Hillary
about Kamala as
Clinton
well.
had been more, I'm sorry?
Kamala Harris as well. I think she's one of the best examples of that. This is somebody, who dropped out with like less than 1% of the vote, had like everything on her side. And then you have, to make it sort of, to be fair about it, so Bernie, for example, not a great speaker, but he was so authentic to himself that he devoted this passionate following. Ron Paul was the same way. Trump was the same way to a certain extent. In his best moments when he was really authentic, with things like he talked about the system being rigged. What do you mean the system's rigged? Like, I know, because I was a part of it. I paid them off. Like that. Those moments are what made Trump Trump.
100%. And when he was running, I was one of the few people saying Donald Trump can win the primary. He might even win the general. And people saying, no, no, no. And I said, no, he has 6.5 of the 7 secrets that make great communicators, and he's far more impactful than you think. But I have to say, Ashton, that it's a new and yes, Bernie is authentic. Kamala can be authentic, but she can also be inauthentic, and she's a really, really effective communicator in many ways. But because of that small inauthenticity where she's performing, and she's trying to achieve a desired result, it undermines that authenticity, whereas Bernie doesn't give a shit.
Yeah.
He's just going to say and do what he wants. Elizabeth Warren is the same way. But I do have to say that it's a little funny that we're saying that someone who has over 30,000 lies documented is being authentic. I prefer my students, whether they're political or in the business or Hollywood celebrities or royalty, to always tell the truth. Mm-hmm. Because I think that not telling the truth does undercut authenticity, because you can't fully believe what someone's going to say, even though they're coming from that seemingly authentic place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I agree with that. So with Trump, that's why I qualify it to a certain extent. Kind of like baked into cake that he like exaggerates and bullshits like sometimes, right?
But why have we lowered the bar?
So I would say with the difference between Trump and certain other politicians who certainly lie quite frequently. I mean, we see it right now with this current
administration. Never that much.
Trump's bullshit was about mostly stupid shit. It was like crowd sizes. It was about, no one knows this better than me. It was just, that was the baked into cake part, rather than politicians who pretend to be straightforward and honest and full of integrity and then just consistently lie. Like, Putin caused inflation, Jim Crow 2.0, they're going to put you back in chains. Like,
but hold on. Oh my God. We could go on for hours. We can go on for hours. We First of all, Putin attacking Ukraine and the oil prices that have increased have in fact inflated what people have to pay when they put gasoline in their car. Do you disagree with that?
Yeah. So the Russian invasion of Ukraine has increased the prices of oil. Yes. Inflation started well before Putin.
There was this global pandemic for 2 years, which is still going on, which totally screwed up supply chains. How could that not have an impact on prices?
Well, in the United States, for example, we have significantly higher inflation than other parts of the world as well. So it didn't hit all places equally. And the $6 trillion and increasing the monetary supply by 35%, right? That's gonna cause inflationary pressures.
First of all, I don't know if it's true that our inflation is worse than all the other countries in the world.
Yeah. But we're one of the higher ones. Yeah.
Right. But I think you then have to have a heart-to-heart, face-to-face conversation with the tens and tens of millions of people who got those COVID stimulus checks, those the $600 and then the $2,000 and then got all these unemployment benefits. I mean, does government not take care of people when there is a global emergency that killed, as of yesterday, a million people? And I think there is a role for government, and sometimes that does cause prices to go up. It does. But lying about the election, for example, which is at the fundamental core of our democracy, lying about that when you have Republican secretaries of state and governors saying that what Donald Trump is saying is absolutely not true, and they frickin' counted the votes, that is not a trivial matter. This lying is an issue, and it undercuts his authority and his credibility and his authenticity. And that's why when you and I were talking, I said, he can't win again. He may get the nomination, but he cannot win. He has, like OJ. OJ won the first trial because people still thought he was cool. But when he went into the civil trial, in addition to having a different standard of proof, of course, he lost because the gig was up. The gig will be up for Donald Trump by 2024. He will not be reelected president if he gets the nomination. Ron DeSantis, however, very likely could be the next president because he's a good communicator and he's strategically a genius at co-opting the Donald Trump momentum and adding a lot to it.
The bit I would disagree with you on is that Trump somehow started the election questioning, right? We had that in 2016, we had that in 2000, we even had that in 2004. It's a dangerous thing. We shouldn't be in a situation, we shouldn't be a country now, like a third world country, where the loser is going to challenge the results of the election every single time, right? And so
are you saying there is a moral equivalency between Hillary pointing to certain things and not having her fans storm the Capitol and not, and giving up, conceding?
Hillary, she still doesn't claim that it was a legitimate election, right?
You can run the best campaign, you can even become the nominee, and you can have the election stolen from you.
Spread understanding that this election was not on the level. We still don't know what really happened, Isaac. I mean, there's just a lot.
She still doesn't claim it was legitimate.
Well, but part of it, I think, is also because she won by 2.9 million votes.
That's a different argument. Everyone knew the rules of the game coming in. If the goal was to win the popular vote, there would be different strategies that you could employ to maximize, Republican support in places like LA or New York City and Philadelphia, because although they're small percentage terms,
I agree.
Raw numbers, there's a lot of people, right, who know their vote will never count. So, but you have to play the rules of the game, right? And if she did, by the way, she did play the rules of the game. She did maximize her percentage chances of winning the election by visiting some of those states. She would have won.
By the way, I completely disagree with it. People keep talking about if she had only gone to Wisconsin, how would that have gotten her to win Michigan and Pennsylvania?
No, she would have had to spend more time in those states as well and cater her message towards, those were traditional Democratic states, right? They're not impossible to win.
If she had talked more about climate change, she would be in the White House now. Anyway, the issue is was she inauthentic in her communications? Yes, and she still is. Is Donald Trump more authentic in certain ways? Yes, but when I teach my clients, I tell them never, ever, ever, ever to say something that is not true, or if they don't know, to say, I'm not certain about this, but it's my belief that blah blah blah. I'll check it out, because integrity and authenticity, in my mind, are tremendously linked.
Yep, I completely agree with that. So, who do you think, maybe looking across the world landscape as well as the United States, currently in a position of power? You mentioned DeSantis being a quite effective communicator and strategist, which I completely agree with. Who would you say would be in that bucket as well?
I mean, currently, I actually like Emmanuel Macron, and I was really happy that he won that election. He, to me, seems like a really charming, natural, authentic human being. He speaks in a conversational way. I love, he addressed the United States in English some time ago. I thought that was really cool. I love Macron. I love the Prime Minister of New Zealand. I think she's amazing. I'm not a fan of the authoritarians, even though they can be very effective communicators, like Erdogan and Bolsonaro and Putin. Not a fan. But again, I'm not a fan of Hitler either. Yeah. And Hitler was an extraordinarily effective communicator.
He was effective. Yeah, that's for sure. So, who do you think are the most overrated and underrated speakers in history?
I think Gavin Newsom has a chance of being the Democratic nominee in 2024. And I think Gavin is underrated. I think he's a far more effective communicator and speaker than we give him credit for. I think Tim Ryan, who I mentioned, who's in a race to win the Senate in Ohio, I think he is an incredibly effective communicator. Very passionate, but he's very mainstream. He's very blue collar. He's very relatable. and I think Tim has a chance of being the nominee for the Democratic, the Democratic nominee for president as well. I do not believe that Joe Biden is effective. I think if you take away how old he looks and you take away the stumbling that he always has with sentences, he's got a speech issue. He's always had that. It's gotten worse. It's not a good look. It's going to, I believe, disqualify him from being renominated and reelected. Kamala is, I think, underappreciated in certain ways and overappreciated. When she is on, like when she's in the Judiciary Committee hearings and she's cross-examining witnesses or Supreme Court nominees, she's really good. She's really good, Ashton. As a lawyer, I would think you would appreciate that.
Even though I look at her now, I'm like, this is when she ad-libs now, it's like a dumpster fire. It's like, oh my God. But yeah, I remember she had moments in the Judiciary Committee where she was speaking, and she came off as a effective prosecutorial type person.
Right. And I think, but for that, Joe Biden would not have picked her as VP. I think that is her branding, and it's been very effective. I think she's immature. I think she's not quite ready for prime time, but she's a talented and effective communicator and politician, but she's not going to be ready for 2024.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah, the Tim Ryan, somebody like that would be effective if they were to get the Democratic nomination. They would be competitive. A center-left person who can speak to Middle America would be quite an effective candidate. So we'll have to see. I think he's going to lose the Ohio race just because I think Ohio has moved quite a bit to the Republican camp. But if he were to win I could see him being a nominee, yeah.
I agree. The abortion decision is going to upend all political thought. I have called this the midterms 3 different elections, which all cut in favor of Democrats. It's the women's reproductive choice elections of 2022. It's the climate emergency elections of 2022. And then something I call the marijuana midterms. So if you can activate non-voters who care about climate, non-voters who care about a woman's reproductive rights, and non-voters who love marijuana and want to see it decriminalized nationally, that is a huge chunk of the 120 million American citizens who won't otherwise vote. If they vote, every single pollster's projection for the House, the Senate, governorships is going to be completely wrong.
Okay, so you and I will have to go out for drinks for that.
Let's bet.
Yeah, let's bet. I'll take a bet that it will be Republicans taking up at least 20 seats in the House. I'll say they'll be the majority of the Senate and the House. I think these are subsidiary issues to inflation, economy, crime. Even though crime is a national issue, that people blame Democrats for that. So I think that's going to win the day.
Let me give you the mathematical response to that. And this is the old, I think, way that consultants think about elections. You can talk about crime, you can talk about inflation, you can talk about, gas prices, you can talk about jobs and the economy, right? Immigration even, all of these issues. Even with all of these issues, you're going to have 120 million American citizens, mostly Democratic base voters who will not be voting because they're not inspired by those issues. They're just not inspired by those issues, right? You can't blame them. What do they care about? They like to smoke weed. That's going to have them vote, if it's properly messaged, for Democrats. They care about climate change. That's not in the top tier list of issues that people focus on. So we're undercounting the enthusiasm of core Democratic voters. So just marijuana, climate, and reproductive choice. Those are issues that the 120 million who don't vote can be and will be inspired by. So I'll take your bet. Okay. So if it's less than a 30 vote pickup in the House, you're taking me to a dinner of my choice in Los Angeles. All right. And if it's 30 or more, I'm taking you to whatever restaurant you want, Ashton.
Okay. All right, fair enough. That sounds like a deal. What do you think are the most impactful speeches? You've obviously studied speeches, some of the most memorable ones. What do you think are some of the most impactful ones in history?
Right. I wrote a book on it. I think by far the I Have a Dream speech is the greatest speech of the 20th century and perhaps in all of history.
I read that.
I was just in Washington for the White House Correspondents' Dinner events, and I went to the Lincoln Memorial, and I read the Gettysburg Address. I mean, that's possibly the greatest speech that's ever been written. We don't know how it was delivered, unfortunately. I heard Lincoln had a bit of a high, squeaky voice, but he was one of the greatest poets in the history of the world. The Ask Not What Your Country Can Do For You, unbelievably great speech by JFK. I Have a Dream and then the Kennedy inaugural are considered by most people to be the number one and number two speeches of the 20th century. But one of the most, probably the most effective speech, at least political speech, that's ever been given is one that took a state senator in a period of 4 years and turned him into the president of the United States. And that was Barack Obama's 2004 keynote speech for John Kerry in Boston. And I was actually there in the arena, and I turned to a United States senator and I said, this guy's going to be the next president if he wants it. And he said, oh, no, young man. He didn't say young man, but that was the tone. He said, no, he's too young, maybe in time, but not now. I said, no. He struck a chord that no politician has struck. You could feel it in the arena. He's going to be the next president if he wants.
Mm-hmm.
So
that was an excellent speech. Are there any sort of bad guys in history that you've noticed gave like a really resounding speech? Because we always point to sort of the Western leaders and democratically elected people. Are there any nefarious characters that you're like, oh, that was an amazing speech?
Well, listen, Hitler.
Yeah.
I mean,
is there one in particular? Or no.
Listen, I wrote my book, Words That Shook the World, on the 20 greatest or most inspiring speeches of the 20th century. And I purposely chose not to either study or include Hitler, Mussolini, Mao Zedong, any of these bad authoritarian dictators, because I do not believe that their words shook the world in a positive way, and that was the focus of the book.
Right.
So, but they used all the techniques, right? Yeah. I mean, my understanding, Hitler would practice, in front of a mirror, and it's the cadence and to create this hypnotic effect. Mm-hmm. But he was manipulating people, and he was lowering the enlightenment of the planet. And I try not to focus too much on people like that. I like people who were incredibly uplifting.
Right.
And for example, one of the greatest speeches, it was more of a poem than a speech, was Amanda Gorman, who was that African-American poet for Joe Biden's inauguration. Did you see her presence, her use of voice tone, her incredible timing and the cadence? It's incredible. But that was poetry. But great speeches like from Abraham Lincoln or Martin Luther King are poetry. They're songs.
I was just thinking it would be a hard one to say, like the most influential speeches, and then it's like page 12, Adolf Hitler. It's like that would be a hard one to kind of have in there. People would think you're endorsing or something. So even with last name Greene,
No, my book is a coffee table book, and I said I don't want, especially being Jewish, right? I don't want Adolf Hitler on my coffee table.
But yeah, the interesting dynamic about that, of course, is that some obviously some really bad people have been able to inspire millions of people, tens of millions of people as well. My mom is from Iran. She's a Persian Jewish refugee from that country, and so that's one of the more recent examples in history of somebody with medieval values being able to galvanize large scale support to take over a country, and so that aspect of human nature also interests me, is just like how, and usually even with some of the worst people, it's not like they speak in a X-rated tone or they talk about killing everybody, right? A lot of times they are also presenting, some version of a hopeful message, even though they have much more sinister ideas of how to achieve that. So that aspect has always been interesting to me as well.
Yeah, you have to appeal to basic human needs. Right. Whether you want to take people in a good direction or a horrible direction. And that's what dictators do. That's what, these charismatic creatures throughout history have done. But not to, again, remember what I said earlier, what makes a great speaker in my mind is to do something that really does help people, not something that just gains money or power for yourself.
What would be your biggest recommendation for, let's say, both political parties in terms of communication? You're advising Republican leader, you're advising Democrat leader. What do you focus on? And then mention what gives you the most anxiety about the future and what gives you the most hope.
I'm a big fan of integrity and telling the truth. I think the Republican Party needs to tell the truth. And I know politically that's tough. And the truth is that Donald Trump lost the 2020 election. I think they also need to understand that we have some issues that they're wrong on, like climate change, and they need to redesign how they approach how we use fossil fuels in this country. With Democrats, even though I am a Democrat, as you, I'm sure, can tell, the fact that the San Francisco School Board, Democrats on the San Francisco School Board, were trying to cancel Abraham Lincoln and George Washington. Mm-hmm. I'm furious about that. It's like, because they weren't good enough to Black people. It's like, well, there's this thing called history, and we have an evolution. And even in our Constitution, we had Black people were only 3/5 of people. They were counted as 3/5. Right. So we've made huge evolutionary change. You cannot blame George Washington or Abraham Lincoln from for living in a time where we weren't where we are now. So our wokeness as Democrats are destroying our ability to talk about the issues, the vast majority of issues that Democrats have that are owned and supported by the rest of the American people, like climate, like legalizing marijuana, like pro-choice, like equal pay for women, like voting rights, all of that. And I do think that wokeness also, and Ron DeSantis totally played the Democrats because this Don't Say Gay bill in Florida that Disney got all upset about, it's not a bad bill. It's not a bad bill. I don't want my son or daughter being taught about sexuality or transgender issues when they're 6, 7, and 8 years old. I mean, that's just, the Democrats have to understand, and this defund the police. So the extreme 5% needs to get their shit together, because Republicans are genius at leveraging this wokeness into electoral victory. And they will in the midterms unless we focus on the issues that America cares about. And even you care about, like legalizing pot. So what was the other question?
The last question was what gives you most consternation? And this doesn't have to be political, but one of the things, so you focus obviously on public speaking, a lot of children, because social media and just constant communication on texting, on devices, have lost communication skills. Like that's a fact. A lot of people can't handle confrontation. They can't handle face-to-face interaction. The pandemic obviously made this worse, and especially to the most vulnerable children. Separated them from their peers for years. So what gives you most consternation just in society in general, and what gives you most hope for the future?
I am concerned about our lack of face-to-face communication. I think that hurts us. We are social beings. We have to be out amongst other people. When we are isolated, that's what creates serial killers. They're always loners. It's not who we are as a species. We need to be with other people. So that concerns me. And texting does not replace having a real conversation like you and I are going to have when you buy me dinner after the election. But the thing that bothers me the most right now is I know a fair amount about narcissistic personality disorder. I wrote a piece about Donald Trump. Vladimir Putin is mentally ill. I think he's a narcissistic personality disorder victim, and he's also a sociopath. He doesn't care about killing Ukrainians. He doesn't care about torturing people. He is only focused on his own agenda. And people with severe narcissistic personality disorder, they never admit defeat, they never admit weakness, and they never give up. Putin will not give up. That's going to affect gas prices, food commodity prices, and everything for the next several years. So I have some significant consternation about that. You're great to talk to. You're very fun. I love that we don't agree on very much. And again, as I said, I'm looking forward to that dinner.
I appreciate you being with me. I think it was a fascinating discussion. So yeah, we'll see who wins at the end. But looking forward to it as well.
Take care, Ashton.
If you enjoyed our show, please click subscribe to stay up to date with our YouTube channel and podcast, and give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts so that we can keep delivering guys some great content. Thanks for listening, and we will be back next week. We're going to talk about the issues that really matter. Our country, our economy, the Fed, QE, GDP, BTC, NFTs, AOC, the CCP, Cardi B, Yeezy, Yellow Socks, Iran, Joe Biden's dementia, come on, man, and probably sex robots. We stand for a free and open debate and exchange of ideas. And if you disagree with anything we talk about, you are a racist and no better than Hitler. What? Let's get started.